way, anyway.
Yeah, we should sit down and talk about things. I think I could help definitely different areas.
Yeah, more about people inside and stuff like that.
Good morning, everybody. I'll try that again. Good morning, everybody. You've had a coffee, so you should be awake. Welcome to Paignton Zoo. How lovely of you all to join us this morning. My name's Jenny Paignton, if we haven't already met. I'm the fundraising manager here at the zoo, and I've organised today, so if you have any problems, it should be alright, should have fun. Just want to say a few things about the logistics of today. We do have toilets at the far side of the bar, so that's right at the other end. Fire exits are on the plane. Here, we're not expecting a drill today, so if the alarm goes off, please just make your way outside. And the gathering point is just down near the train there, so if we can all gather out there, so should be okay though. Please can I ask you to make sure that your mobile phones are on silent. So, because nothing worse when someone's trying to present and someone's phone goes off and it's a little embarrassing for yourself. So, you may notice on here that there's a major flaw in my design. In respect, I've put refresh on phone break, and there's someone talking at 11, so I don't know how that works, but anyway, so I apologise for that. just to let you know, I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then Neil's coming to talk to us from Conlumino, and I really appreciate him joining us this morning. He's come all the way from London. He's with us today because of Barclays, and Barclays are the sponsor today as well, and thanks to them, they introduced me to him, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's telling everything about social media, probably some aspects you didn't even know existed, so I certainly found it really interesting. We also have George Brewer, from our digital marketing manager here at the zoo, who's going to talk very briefly after the break, having a break at 11:15. So we'll have coffee again then, and then George's coming on at 11:30. Then Matt Pope from Nutshell Laws coming on from 12 to 12:30, and Andrew Walker from Rain Marketing is 12:30 to 1. I can't promise you all these schedules are going to stay, and we may run over a little bit. And then we're going to have lunch sort of 1 o'clock-ish, and you don't have to disappear. Please feel free to stay here this afternoon and have a wander around the zoo. We have 2 baby orangutans, we have a beautiful baby giraffe. It's a lovely sunny day. I booked this especially for you. So do enjoy the afternoon, and feel free to network, of course. I hope you all pass your business cards around. That's what today's all about, is making connections. I just want to talk a little bit about the zoo and what I do. I run an SOS club. It's a corporate members club. There are many members here today, so thank you for joining me again, guys. It's great. It's a fantastic club to be part of. You can have your signage here at the zoo. The sign is just on the main walkway as you come down, so you can see all the members. We also have a sign at Living Coasts, and you also get passes to come to the zoo. Now, these passes don't have photographs on, so if you're an annual member, usually you have a photograph on there so you can be identified when you come in, but the passes for corporates are actually just blank. They just have the logo on, so anyone within your organisation can use them, or even your clients. So it's a fantastic way, and a little thank you to give to your staff or your clients. When anyone joins, or even if they renew, I put on to Facebook and Twitter. I think we have about 16,000 followers on Facebook at the moment, about 5,000 on Twitter, something like that. So all of those people know, and you get a bit of highlight on that, which is fantastic for your business. And you also get your company name listed on our website, which is fantastic for your search engine optimization. But Andrew will probably tell you a bit about that later. Every month I organise an SOS business breakfast. Now, I plan to do seminars in every autumn and every spring, and my business breakfasts happen every month. And they're over at Living Coast in Torquay, fantastic location, beautiful sea views. It's 7:30 in the morning, so it's before your main working day, and that's a great opportunity to network with other businesses. You don't have to be an SOS member. It's £10 for breakfast if you are, and it's £12 if you're not. So it's a great opportunity to come along. And you may have seen on all the seats I've actually put down information about the breakfast that's happening next week. So you may want to come along to that. Kelly Harper will be telling us 7 ways to maximise your business through learning. So very interesting. So if you've got a chance to come next week, it'd be lovely to see some of you again. I also organise team days. So you may, for your company, you may be thinking about doing a little bit of team building and coming along to the zoo. There are any numbers of things you can do here. Some companies come in, maybe use this room to do a bit of learning within their organisation, a bit of sales talk or business talk, and then they have lunch, and then in the afternoon we go off and do crazy things. So that could be making piñatas, and it could be going behind the scenes and meeting some animals and feeding some animals. So there are details on the website about the team days. The starting price is only £36 plus VAT, which is an absolute bargain, just to come into the zoo and do a couple of crazy things. So, but if you have a look on the website, and I can tailor make it to whatever, but it does need to be not too many people. Smaller the better, really, because it's more of an intimate day. So maximum of 50 people. What else do I need to tell you about? I also need to give you the opportunity. You may wish to advertise your company throughout the zoo. We have these signs located all across the zoo, telling people about the animals that we have. So when you get to an enclosure, there should be a sign telling you about the animals, what they are, where they're from, all the details, and you have the opportunity to put your company logo on there. and it's only £75 plus VAT, and we have about 450 to 500,000 visitors a year. So that's here and at Living Coasts. So it's a fantastic opportunity if you want to do that. I also quickly want to tell you there's also leaflets on your chairs about the events we've got coming up this year. We're actually opening a new exhibit around Easter time, it might be just before Easter actually, called Investigate. We celebrated our 90th anniversary last year, so leading up to our 100th, every year we're going to be sort of celebrating a different species, and this year is the year of the insect. So Investigate, they are cute, honestly. So we'll be opening this fantastic exhibit, lots of lovely creepy crawlies, all the kids are going to love it. So, and I'm also doing an amazing ant trail. I don't know whether you saw it as you came into the zoo. If you've got any children, it's a little colouring competition, and we're running it all the way from the main entrance, hopefully down to the exhibit itself. So a little bit of an ant trail, a little bit of fun for children to get involved in. Also organising a penguin ball, great corporate night out if you want to bring some clients. It's at Living Coasts. We did it last year and it was a great success, so we thought we'd give it another go. It's only £40 a ticket, the most brilliant bands. I've got Filthy Gorgeous coming back. We did up My Mistletoe Ball in December, and absolutely brilliant. If you like dancing, this is the night for you. So if you want to, we're taking bookings now already, so if you want to come along, do let me know, I can reserve some spaces for you. And we're going to be doing another seminar in the autumn. I'm not entirely sure of the contents of that. I have left a feedback form on each place for you, and I would really, really love you to fill it out for me. You can leave it anonymous if you wish to, but it's just to get some feedback from you, what you found interesting about today, and what you'd like to do in the future. We're seriously considering doing a workshop type scenario in the autumn, but I want to get some feedback. If something you want to join in with, that'd be great. So any ideas you have, let me know, and then I can try and put that together for you guys. So I'd really like to take this opportunity again to thank the sponsors for today. We've got Conlumino, Nutshell Law, Barclays and Rame. Without those guys, today wouldn't be happening. So I really appreciate their support. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Neil. If you'd like to come up, I'll just get rid of it.
That is mine.
And if I can ask, if we can do questions at the end of the presentation, so.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and good morning, everybody. What I wanted to talk to you about today really is social media and how it's changing the way in which we do business. And this comes partly from some work that we've been doing with Barclays for a while now. And we've talked to a lot of people in business about their use of social media, and we've included some of the findings in this because there's some very interesting things that have come out. But the first thing I want to really talk about is social media itself, because it is really quite a revolution, and I think, like most things, it's a revolution, and when you live in the midst of them, it's very difficult to see how fast and far it is changing the way in which we do business and in which we conduct business. But actually, when you boil it down, what social media is about is communication, and of course, revolution in communication isn't anything new. We have had a lot of revolutions in communication, albeit over a very long period of time, and social media is really the latest incarnation. It's interesting though, because if you look back at the different types of revolution we've had in communications, if you go to the first revolution, it was about 1439 when the printing press by Gutenberg was invented, and that obviously changed communication dramatically, because before that time most written work was kind of put on scrolls, and it was very laborious, and actually it took a very long time. But with the advent of the printing press, obviously it meant that people could communicate much more widely and much more diversely in terms of getting the message out to far more people in a very instantaneous way. And obviously we take it for granted now, but at the time that really revolutionised the way in which people communicated and interacted with each other. We had to wait quite a long time for the next major revolution, and that was probably the telephone in 1876. And again, it meant that people could actually talk over long distances we take it for granted today, but then it really changed the nature of the way in which we communicate, both as businesses and as individuals. The next one, actually, we didn't have to wait that long for, was broadcast. And obviously then, for the first time, people were able to broadcast messages in the sound and then picture and sound into people's households. And then obviously social media is the latest revolution. And actually in some ways, and it's quite a radical thing to say, I think it's more of a revolution than the things that have come before it. And although those things are very dramatic in terms of the changes that they engendered, actually social media is very special. And I think there are 4 reasons that it's actually very revolutionary, and it's actually quite different to those things, significant though they were, that came before. The first one of those is it's a many-to-many communication tool, and I'll come on to these things a little bit later and talk about them. The second thing is it's very much about community. The community defines social media. The third thing is it has levelled the playing field. It's levelled the playing field between businesses, between individuals and businesses, and actually it's a lot more democratic a form of communication than things that we've had before. And the fourth thing is about losing control, and that's very much a business thing, and about how businesses react and feel about social media. So just to look at those things in more detail, the first one is the many-to-many idea. And actually social media is very interesting compared to the previous forms of communication, because when you think about those forms of communication that came before, actually they work in very specific ways. So if you think about print, it's very much a one-to-many tool. There's someone who prints the publication, whether it be a newspaper or a book, and then that gets out to a lot of people. So it's very much defined by what the person who prints the publication wants it to be. They're the definer, and then the other people are the consumers of that publication. Telephones are very much one-to-one. Obviously you can have conference calls on them, but they generally are a one-to-one communication tool. So one person speaks to another person. So again, it's a dramatic step forward when it was invented, but actually it's a very narrow form of communication. Broadcast, again, broadcast is very much one-to-many. There's a broadcaster, and they distribute their information or their output to a lot of people, to mass audiences. But essentially there is one person or one corporation who defines what they are broadcasting. But social media is actually very different because it's a many-to-many communication tool. So actually the people that consume the media are the people actually who produce the media as well. So what we find now is that whether it be Twitter, whether it be blogging, there are people who are normal individuals. They don't own corporations, they don't necessarily they're not involved in publishing. They're just normal individuals who are writing or tweeting or on Facebook, providing opinions, views, ideas, and they're then disseminating through social media their ideas to lots more people. And actually that's why I think in some ways social media is a lot more revolutionary than what came before it, because actually not only is it a new form of communication, but the most important thing it does is it takes away every month the community, people who are involved in Threadless, vote on the ideas they like the most and the designs that they like the most. And I think Threadless pick the top 20 each month, and they actually then put them into production, and they make t-shirts out of them, and they make other things as well now, mugs and all sorts of things. But actually, the design ideas come from the community, and what finally gets produced through the democratic vote also comes from the community as well. And actually what Threadless has done is it has allowed many people who have made those designs and have been successful of being voted through to actually get paid for their designs and the amount that's sold. So it's a very different model. If you think of traditionally how retail would be, someone like Marks & Spencer would go in and pick the t-shirts for you, they'd say, right, these are the designs that are on them, you come and buy them. This is a very, very different model that actually involves a lot of community involvement. And because of that, it has a lot of loyalty, so people actually really engage with this site. And social media has been absolutely fundamental, because through Facebook, through Twitter, really through that kind of marketing via social media, it's really engaged with its community, and it's become a much bigger community as a result. And I think it's a good example of how people are getting involved not just in the production of content, but sometimes through social media they're also getting involved in the production of products as well. And I think it's much more about bringing in people to community, really to be involved in business in this way, which is quite an exceptional way, that is a very interesting development of social media that through previous communication revolutions you wouldn't have seen. Social media has really empowered communities to define content. And it's, of course, it's not just with things like the production of t-shirts. If you think of things like news sites and aggregated news sites, often through people voting up and voting down articles that are interesting, the hierarchy on those news sites changed. And that, again, is a really good example of a community approach. If you think of the BBC, you go onto the BBC website, the BBC define what is the most important story. So they will have an editor that says, right, actually at the moment, it's this story that becomes the top one, and the hierarchy sits underneath, and then all of the different sections for business and whatever have their own hierarchies. If you think about the social media side, something like Reddit or another news aggregator, actually it's the community that defines that. So yes, I mean, the big story might be about flooding, but actually for the community that might not be very interesting, and it might not get a lot of votes or a lot of hits, so it gets pushed down the hierarchy, and the story that's most interesting gets pushed to the top. And that's another example, I think, of how social media and interaction via online is making the community much more important in terms of defining what they see. It doesn't necessarily rely on an editor to produce that content. So social media has created a much better sense of community. It's made people responsible for content and people responsible for ideas as well. The other thing it's done, which I think is one of the most important things from a business and consumer point of view, is it's leveled the playing field. Now, if you think about it, before social media, before online, we all had some power as consumers. We've all had situations where we've gone into a shop, had a service, we've not liked it, we've shouted and jumped up and down, we might have written a letter of complaint, we might have moaned about it, but actually you're pretty powerless in most of those situations, because you can make a fuss in a shop and everyone else can hear you, and maybe people are a bit embarrassed, so they try and sort out the problem. Maybe you can write a letter and it goes straight to the top and someone takes notice, but it's very much a sort of chancy encounter that will get you a result. But actually, social media has tipped that balance, and it's meant that people who do have a complaint or want to moan about something, who may have been a little bit powerless before, suddenly, not in all cases, but in some cases, have a lot more power in their hands, and it's leveled the playing field in terms of power between business or corporations and individuals. And there's lots of examples of how that works. But one of the nicest ones that social media has sort of brought about is a story of United Airlines. Now, United Airlines were transporting a guy called Dave Carroll, who's a musician, and he was a guitarist in his band. He wasn't a very well-known musician. He was Canadian, and he'd only been doing it for a little while. But he had a very expensive guitar. It was a Taylor guitar, and it was his pride and joy. And he was going on a gig, and he got on United Airlines, and he was told that he had to put his guitar in the hold. He wasn't allowed to take it into the cabin, and he said, please can take good care of it. It was obviously packed up. He looked out the window, and of course, as they tend to do, sort of baggage handlers kind of chucking it everywhere. And he said to the stewardess on the plane, look, my guitar's in there, and it's really valuable. And she sort of said, well, I can't really go down and tell them. Sort of shrugged and was very dismissive. He got to the other end, and lo and behold, his guitar was broken. And so, of course, he complained to United Airlines. And by his own account, he got through to one of those awful automated press 1 to do this, press 2 to do this. Got through, finally spoke to someone, nothing happened. Rang again, nothing happened. And he got terribly frustrated because he got caught up in all this sort of melee of sort of corporate complexity, and basically no one was just solving his problem, which is he wanted compensation, or at very least an apology. So Dave Carroll, being a musician, decided that actually what he would do is he'd write a song. He wrote a song called United Breaks Guitars, and he uploaded it to YouTube, and there he is on YouTube. Now, Dave Carroll uploaded it. He'd uploaded songs before, being a musician. He uploaded it, and he went away, and came back a couple of hours later and saw that it actually got quite a few hits. It got a couple of thousand hits, which was quite good for Dave Carroll, who, as I said, wasn't very well known. He then went to bed, and the next morning he woke up and it had something like 250,000 hits. And he thought, wow, this is really quite significant. The next thing he knew, the hits were going up and up. He got a call from the New York Times and said, hang on, what's this story? We're really interested, can we talk to you? And if you go on today, there's lots of feeds of Dave Carroll. This is but one of them, but this one has 8.8 million hits, and that's quite a while ago. Dave Carroll's video went viral and it got picked up in the New York Times, it got picked up in the Washington Post, it got picked up in the Canadian newspapers, and it did United an awful lot of damage, because the two things were very interesting about it were that, first of all, Dave Carroll communicated this message through song, and he mentions United, and the song is all about his experience and how terrible the service is. He mentioned them, and basically he just gave this whole impression of how bad the service was, and at the time they were doing this massive push about how great United was for service. So he undermined all that, and the very interesting thing is that, of course, everyone, or more or less everyone, believes Dave Carroll, because Dave Carroll's a musician, he's an individual, he's a nice guy, you can see him, he's real. Whereas the marketing machine of United, well, no one knows who they are, it's very artificial, it's quite fake. So automatically there's an affinity with Dave Carroll. There's some nice follow-ups to that. The first follow-up is that Dave Carroll did get compensation. He got compensation from United, but he also got 3 new guitars from the owners of Taylor Guitars, who were absolutely delighted that their guitars got mentioned in his video. So actually he came out quitting. The other interesting follow-up is some years later, because of all of this, and he still does it now, he's written books and all sorts of things, Dave Carroll does go around speaking about this experience and other things to do with customer service. And someone asked him to come and speak in the States, and they booked all his flights, and they booked him on United Airlines, who lost his luggage. And that's true. Apparently they were very swift at compensating him and finding it, so he didn't write any more songs. And that's one example. There are loads of examples, perhaps some smaller than this, as to how, with social media, actually it has genuinely levelled that playing field. It's very difficult now for corporations to wield all of the power, because actually, just through all of the different tools we have on social media, individuals actually can almost get their own back. And I'm sure some of you have done it. You know, you're standing in a queue, you're quite frustrated, you know, the people on the checkout and they'll chat and they're not serving properly. In the past, you know, you would stand there and you think, oh, you know, this is ridiculous. You might turn around to the next person and say, oh, it's awful, isn't it? But now you see people, you know, they're in a terrible queue, and this is then going out to hundreds, thousands, possibly even more if it gets retweeted, of people. And that's what social media has done. It's put a lot more power into the hands of the consumer, and it has come at the expense of the corporation. So I think that's why it's quite revolutionary as well. It's really changed that power balance, and it's levelled that playing field. The other thing that I think is very important about social media, and this is from a corporate perspective, is there is a very big element, and I think this is why a lot of corporations are quite nervous about it, of losing control. You do not have control of social media as a corporation. No matter how much you want to control it, you cannot, because it's organic. If you're doing a piece of marketing, if it's on your website or it's a piece of printed marketing, you're in total control. You control what it looks like, you control the messaging on it, you control where it goes to a certain extent. With social media, no matter how good you are at it, you claim the whale. So they came up with some options themselves, and a lot of them were quite serious. Some of them a little bit jokey, like Humphrey. I think Humphrey the Whale was one of the options. Some of them were sort of Latin names that they'd come up with, they were quite fancy. And they put them all out to social media, and they said to people, you know, you choose the name. Now, unfortunately for Greenpeace, one of the names they included, as a bit of a joke, and they actually did not want it to win, actually became quite popular. And that name was Mr. Splashy Pants. And Mr. Splashy Pants, which was put in as a joke by Greenpeace, it got the most votes. Now, it didn't have a majority, so a lot of names. So I think it has something like 15%, which was the highest number. So it was, you know, fairly low, because the votes were spread across a number of names, but it had the highest of anyone. And Greenpeace actually didn't like this, because they were losing control. Because this is not what they wanted. They wanted a more serious name, because this was a serious device and serious campaign. So they actually tried to, in a very nice way, manipulate the results. So the first thing they did is they said, well, we know that voting was going to end today. We're actually extending it by 2 weeks, in the hope that obviously this would be knocked down a little bit. They also, apparently, they've never confirmed this, but apparently they actually took some of the votes off of Mr. Splashy Pants. Which was a very corrupt thing to do. If that is true, and I don't know if that's true, that's what is rumoured to have happened. The trouble was, of course, as soon as that happened, everyone on social media picked up on it. Oh, the vote's being extended. You know, why is that happening? Oh, is it to try and get Mr. Splashy Pants down? Hang on a minute, some of Mr. Splashy Pants votes have disappeared. They considered taking the name off at one point as well, and then that got picked up. And the problem was, as soon as everyone found out about this, Mr. Splashy Pants became even more popular, and people retweeted it, it got on Reddit, it got on the Facebook pages, and there was this massive campaign, and this wasn't developed first. Someone developed this logo, and people were printing this thing out, and they were sticking it up all over the place. And basically, the end result was that from having a small majority, but 15%, the largest number of votes, by the end of this 2-week period that Greenpeace had extended it for, thanks to social media, Mr. Splashy Pants won, and it got 75% of the total vote. And that's really the power of social media. Now, to give Greenpeace their credit, they accepted it, and this whale is called Mr. Splashy Pants. But actually, the interesting thing about it is, what they learned is, yes, it was very comfortable. They didn't want it called Mr. Splashy Pants. It sounds a bit silly, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. But actually, the interesting thing was, by losing control and actually just accepting it and actually having a laugh with it, it got so many more hits, it got so much more engagement than it otherwise would have done. And actually, people really engaged with the concept as well. They got a lot more hits to the pages talking about the concept, they got more members out of it as a result as well. So actually, by losing control and accepting that that might not be your preferred name, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but if you accept it and actually go with what the community says, actually because it's voted for by the community, it's sometimes not quite as silly as it seems, because this isn't something you've come up with, this is organically what people have wanted and have voted for. So actually, it's a really good lesson in the fact that losing control isn't always a bad thing. There's another nice example as well, which is much shorter, but if anyone engaged with Waitrose on Twitter, and Waitrose did a campaign last year, beginning of last year, and they said, I shop at Waitrose because, hashtag. And the idea was that everyone on Twitter would come out with, I shop at Waitrose because it's lovely service, it's great food, oh, because my local branch is really convenient and nice. Unfortunately, it got hijacked, as you might have expected, and we got a lot of tweets coming through saying things like, I shop at Waitrose because Tarquin can't get any biscuits from elsewhere. Nowhere else does foie gras so nicely as Waitrose. And these things became more and more absurd, and really it was very much caricature. But interestingly, Waitrose's response was, they obviously were quite taken aback, because this is not what they wanted. However, a tweet came out around 4 o'clock on that day from Waitrose, and it just said, thank you ever so much for all your responses. We've had a really good giggle in Waitrose HQ. And automatically, because they hadn't tried to control it or put it back or be a bit serious about it, they just literally said, this is actually quite funny. The whole thing calmed down quite quickly, and actually, they got a lot of kudos from that. People were saying good sports, or they've had a good laugh, and they actually retweeted some of the funny ones to show that actually, they could have a laugh at themselves as well. It's not what they wanted to do, but because they accepted that they had lost control, it actually played out a lot better for them. If they tried to be serious, delete the tweets or pull it back, people would have reacted quite angrily to that. So I think that's a really important lesson for corporations about social media. You will lose control sometimes, and actually it's fine. So what about social media today? Well, the interesting thing is, of online users, about 72% of people use it regularly. So actually, it's very, very embedded. It's something that is a part of people's lives. It's a fairly even split between male and females, slightly more of a female bias towards using social media regularly. And actually, although there is obviously a younger bias, as you'd expect, a lot of older consumers, over 55s, about 62% of them regularly use social media. And actually, even when you get into the kind of 65 plus and even 75 plus demographic now, there are more and more consumers coming and using at least one form of social media. So it is a very democratic form of communication, and we think of it as being a very new form of communication. But actually, it's spread very, very quickly. And that's where it's also different to things that have come before it. If you think of something like telephone or television, it was a long time before every person had a television in their household. There was a very long acceptance, sort of uptake period, because it was very expensive and it took a lot of time for it to get into every household. Social media isn't like that, because the way technology is, it's hit and it's been absorbed very, very rapidly, and it's regularly used by all segments of the population. So it is a very universal tool now, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily realise how universal it is, because we all think it's quite new and it's a very young thing, but actually the truth is it isn't. It's much more democratic. We use it intensely as well. Almost half of us now are using it more than once a day, and actually interestingly within that segment, those people are actually using it more intensely than that might suggest. Most of the people within that segment are probably using it at least once every couple of hours. People will have Twitter open on their phone, on their desktop, they'll be looking at it. People will be on Facebook scrolling down. Doesn't mean to say they're using it a lot, they might just look at quick updates, but people do use social media a lot more, certainly much more than you pick up a newspaper, for example. Some people using it once a day, a few people using it less frequently, but those numbers are dwindling, and each year when we rerun our survey for these numbers, we just see it move in this direction. So not only do a lot of people use it, it is used very intensely as well, and much more than other media. What are people using it for? Well, actually, interestingly, a lot of people use it for things like messaging and contact. So in some ways, especially for younger consumers, it's kind of replaced email for some purposes. People arranging a night out or to meet up with someone. These days, in the younger segment, are much more likely to do it via social media than they are via email. Because email for a lot of younger people is a bit old-fashioned, and it's a bit of a business tool, whereas social media is seen as the thing to use. Personal news, gathering news on family and friends. Some people getting general news from social media. A lot of people pick up breaking stories from social media. It's often the first place that you will find something of a breaking nature. You'll see it on a hashtag, you'll see it on the Facebook page. Pictures and videos, about half of people. Not so many people use it for location services, and not that many people using it for directly buying products. That's not really an area where it's capitalised on yet. So there's a whole diverse array of things that people are using social media for. But this is quite important, because if you're a business, what you mustn't forget is that a lot of it is about this space here, personal use and messaging contact. And that's often a personal thing. And there is a big thing with social media that if you're a business, especially on something like Facebook, if you're getting into it, you have to remember that for a lot of people this is a personal space. This is a place where they're having conversations with their friends. And sometimes that jars. If you're a big brand and you come waltzing in, it doesn't always strike the right tone in terms of communication. So you have to be quite careful in understanding that for a lot of people, social media is still a very personal tool. You can get in there and engage with them, but it has to be done in quite a specific way. The interesting one, though, is about buying products, because although only about 12% of people use social media directly for buying products, the influence of social media is a lot greater. So, if you look at where purchases have been influenced by social media, the percentage of people who say they've had purchases influenced by social media, you can see that in something like travel, for example, over a fifth, about 22% of all purchases have been influenced at some point by social media. So this might be something, when we do this survey year on year, we always see these numbers grow, and social media is playing a much bigger role in influencing consumers in terms of the purchases they make. So actually, although they're not buying directly by social media is very important when it comes to influencing people about which product to buy or which service to use, which hotel to stay at, and things like that. What's interesting, though, is back to this idea of community, because if you think about it, in terms of how people are influenced, there's a very neat circle, because what people will do is a lot of people will discover things on social media. About 74% of people using social media discover things on there. They discover a product or a brand or a hotel or a special offer for an airline or something like that. So using it as that point of discovery. What they then do is they sometimes assess via social media. So they're looking at the options, they're looking at the reviews, they're looking at all of the different things that social media has to offer about that product or service. So if you're going to a destination you've not been to before, maybe you look on Pinterest, you look at pictures of that place, you look to understand what's there, you look at what people have been saying on social media sites like Twitter. But then, of course, because it's a community, about 31% of people using social media are then feeding back. So they're leaving their own feedback. So they've gone on a holiday and it was great, and they've tweeted, oh, it's a great hotel, wonderful, or awful hotel, awful service. They're putting pictures on Pinterest of things that they've seen. And then, of course, what happens is their feedback goes into someone else's discovery. And there is this very clear feedback loop where actually, as more people contribute to social media, it becomes more valuable as a tool, and then more people use it actually as a part of the purchase process. And what's important in that is that actually, because a lot of this is done by individuals, there's trust there. Now it's interesting because actually there are a lot of fake reviews and there are a lot of fake Twitter accounts and things like that that corporations are behind to try and influence consumers. But the reason they do that is because we've found in our studies that if a piece of feedback is left by an individual, there is a much greater propensity to believe it than if it's left by a corporation. So if someone says this hotel is great, then more people will believe that than if the hotel or even another corporation says this hotel is great. So there's much more trust with individuals, and that's important in the sense of community because it means people actually often are placing more reliance on these things in social media than they might be on official marketing. Of course, as I say, it's actually quite challenged because we all know things like TripAdvisor, there are fake reviews on there are things that aren't quite truthful on there that are planted, and that's one of the issues with dealing with social media from a corporate point of view. But actually this feedback loop is important because it's where people are getting more and more information and they're making more and more decisions in terms of what they consume, where they consume based on that. So what about business views on social media? Well, this is something we looked at the Barclays, and what we did is we talked to about 126 firms across travel, leisure, hospitality, whole mix of businesses, big and small, some of them chains, some of them individual businesses, lots of sizes in there. So it should be a fairly representative spread of views. And one of the interesting things that we found from this is actually, when we asked people is social media a valuable route to market for a business, the vast majority of businesses actually do see the opportunity, which is actually quite encouraging for new technology. So about 33% say, yes, it's very valuable for us. About 40% saying, well, there's some opportunity. 21% saying it's limited, but hardly anyone, only about 4.6 or 4.85% saying, well, actually it's a bit of a fad. So there's a really strong view within certainly leisure businesses that social media is very important, and actually it's an opportunity, and it should be seen as an opportunity in terms of marketing. We asked businesses what the purpose of social media was for them, and we asked them to rank different things. And what's interesting is the most important thing that came out for businesses in the leisure space certainly was it's a tool to attract new audiences. And there's a lot of talk here around you can reach a lot of people quite cheaply. You don't have to put much effort, not like printing a flyer, it's not necessarily like buying email addresses to do an email campaign. You actually can reach new audiences quite quickly and quite cost effectively. The key thing there though, of course, is what you're putting out. And if you're putting out boring tweets and putting out boring updates, people are not likely to engage with it. However, if you get the right thing, it can be engaged with and people will find that and look at that. So attracting new audience is very important. Marketing to existing customers as well. Because of course if people follow you, if they're in your LinkedIn group or they're within your club in terms of what you're doing with social media, actually you've got an ideal platform to market to them. And a lot of businesses use it for that as well. Those two things are probably quite obvious. But another interesting thing that came out is monitoring brand reputation. I mean, the number of companies now that will type their name into searches in Twitter and Facebook because they want to know what people are saying about them. And some that aren't even on social media from a presence point of view themselves will monitor it very actively to find out what's being said about them. And they will use that quite proactively to either follow up with individuals or to remedy problems. And that's a very important thing because as well as talking, social media is about listening as well. It's about sitting back and finding out what people are talking about you as a brand, but also about the business you're in. I mean, you can find great opportunities through social media from people saying, oh, that doesn't work very well, or I wish I had a t-shirt that looks like that. If you look hard enough, you can find some commercial opportunities there, but you have to listen and you have to monitor, and that's very important. Some businesses trialing new products and offerings, so if you've got a new flavour, if you're in food, if you've got a new deal, if you're in... There's quite a hierarchy of things that you can use social media for, but really most businesses are using it for marketing at the moment, and they're starting to come on much more to the monitoring and the listening side as well. That's coming up to become more important. So it's important to think about what you're using social media for and how you're using it, because actually, although we talk about it as a tool, there's lots of different purposes that you can use it for, and the way in which you use it is very much determined by exactly what you want to do, because there are different ways of doing different things and getting different results, as we'll see a bit later on. The other interesting thing is we asked people about their marketing budgets, and again, this is in the leisure space. And in 2011, we asked them to split it down, and these are obviously approximate results. But interestingly, about 62% of the marketing budget in 2011 was traditional media, and about 38% was social media. In 2012, it was about 60-40 as an average for all of the businesses, so you can see it's moved slightly in favour of social media. And we asked people to predict for 2013 because 2013 hadn't finished when we did the survey, so we asked them to estimate. And again, you can see there is it's not a massive movement, but it's a slight movement. And I think it's very interesting because it does show that certainly within this space, a lot more effort is being put into social media away from traditional channels. And that's not surprising because if you look at the habits of someone who's age 16 today, for example, they're very different from the 16-year-old of 20 years ago or so. 16-year-old of 20 years ago would spend a lot of time in front of the television. Actually, the 16-year-old today does not spend a lot of time in front of the television, they spend a lot of time on YouTube. So if you're an advertiser trying to get to that market, yes, you will still get them through television, but actually, it's probably much more effective if you do something with YouTube or you do something with Google, because actually that, from a media consumption point of view, is where they spend more of their time. And actually, to a lesser extent, the same is true of all of us. I think we all split our time now much more between different types of media than we used to. And that is quite important because it determines where you put your marketing budget. And actually, if you want to reach audiences, you're going to have to put more of it into social media because that's where a lot more of the audience is now. Doesn't mean to say you neglect these things, they're still very important, the traditional media, but you do need to put more effort into the social media as well. We also asked people who was responsible for social media within the organisation, and actually this was one of the most interesting things because there was no conclusive answer. It was very, very varied and it depended on the size of the business as well to an extent. Actually, the most popular answer was some in-house individual. And when we spoke to people to get some colour behind what was going on here, the answer was, well, you know, there's this guy called Dave and he's really good on social media. And actually, to be honest, he's funded in a warehouse and he has nothing to do with marketing, but he's really good on social media. So we got him to do it. And actually, it's often the person that's quite young or into the technology, and it's just given to some random person within the business. Obviously, there's probably a bit of guidance and control there, but it does show the degree, perhaps, to whilst businesses want to get to social media, there perhaps aren't always the skills and the expertise within the business to do that. And actually, it's interesting as well, because some of the businesses we spoke to said, well, we do it now, but the idea for it didn't come from us in senior management, because we don't really know about this stuff. It came from people who are younger in the organisation that were saying, well, you know, you should get into social media, it's really interesting. So it's still a business. I think over time what we'll see is more businesses will migrate to having specialist teams, or at least a dedicated individual or someone who's responsible. But at the moment there is quite a variance in who is responsible for social media, which again perhaps reflects that it's actually quite a democratic tool. But you do have to be careful. The most interesting thing recently, which was last year, is when people were being made redundant from HMB, they called them all up into a room, they got them in one morning, they did that, who was in charge of social media was sitting in that room, and of course the lady in charge of social media is all mobile enabled because she is doing things on the fly, and they'd forgotten to ask this person for their devices back, and they'd indeed forgotten to ask her for the password to Twitter. So if the lady on social media was tweeting to HMB's many thousand followers, being made redundant at the moment, sitting in a room, really unprofessional, not being handled terribly well, and of course everyone started retweeting it and getting terribly excited. Because it's very real time, apparently the person on the stage doing the talk was alerted to the fact that someone was tweeting from the audience, which was terribly embarrassing, and had to beg to get the passwords back because no one else in HMB apart from this lady knew them, which shows how even a big organisation, through lack of proper structure, can actually be stung if you're not organising the social media team in the right way. It's a great thing, but businesses still do have concerns, and the biggest one of those is negative publicity. That's that thing about losing control. People are really worried that actually they'll come across badly on social media or a negative story will spread. It takes up a lot of time to manage. It does if you do it properly. It can be very time consuming if you're a business that says, you know, tweet us for customer services, and you're getting thousands of people tweeting you at once. Actually, you think, you know, 140 characters, it doesn't take long to sort out. Actually, it can take a phenomenal amount of time. So you have to be prepared to invest time in it, and that's a concern of many businesses. We'll look at this a little bit later, but really concerned about which media to use because there are a lot of them out there and it's a challenge. Some businesses are saying, well, there's technical skills involved, we don't have them. Some businesses, it's an unprofessional way of communicating, and I think that's interesting because that's probably quite an old-fashioned view. It depends how you communicate and which medium you use, of course, but some businesses are a little bit reluctant to do that. It costs a lot to set up and maintain. I don't necessarily think it does, but that is a fear of some businesses. And also some businesses saying it's not something our customers would like. And actually that's fair enough. There are customer segments that don't necessarily like it. They're getting fewer and far between, but there are still some that fall into that segment. So social media is a great thing, but there are concerns that businesses have, and I think these are important areas that need to be looked into and considered for businesses that are getting into social media, because there are quite a lot of concerns. The negative publicity one there is the main one, and actually the message there comes back to that user control thing. The fact is, even if you're not on social media, if you do something wrong, you'll get negative publicity because of it. Being on social media won't necessarily generate negative publicity. It gives you the opportunity to perhaps control it or engage with it a little bit more. But the fact is, social media is here, it's here to stay, and I think negative publicity is just a function of what social media is about. Interestingly though, despite those concerns, if you ask businesses how the role of social media in their business will change over the next year, so a relatively short space of time, the vast majority of people say it will increase. 14% saying it will increase significantly, 44% saying it will increase slightly, about a third saying about the same, and very few people say it will decrease. So there's very much this view about the full momentum of social media, that it is just going to grow, it's going to become much more important. And I think that's right. I think that is the general trend that we're seeing. So in terms of social media types, we asked businesses which social media they used, and what's interesting is, of course, you get this kind of real clustering around the popular technologies. So 80% almost are using Facebook because it's the biggest platform, it's where the customers are, it's where the bulk are. 46% are using Twitter. Again, it's a massive audience base and it's something that's quite simple. Just over a third are using YouTube. 21% using LinkedIn. They're more business providers, obviously if they're trying to link in with the business community, which is what LinkedIn is about. Interestingly, you then start to get this long tail, and there are more that come off the end of here that we haven't put on here, but you're starting to see some newer sort of areas of social media come through. So Pinterest is something that's growing quite rapidly. So, a picture sharing site, essentially. You take a picture of something, you find something visually stimulating, you pin it on a board, and you can have boards about different things, technologies, holidays, destinations, locations. And actually that's become a lot more popular. And it's interesting with Pinterest because you can put words with it as well, so you can put some words under it. But actually people really respond well to visual images. I think that's one of the things that's perhaps been quite attractive about Twitter, in the sense that actually it's a very condensed form of text, so you're not reading very much, it's very quick. But of course then Pinterest is quicker still, because actually you're just scanning through images and seeing things that you like. So Pinterest is fairly small, but actually it's something that has garnered a lot more interest. And certainly in sectors like fashion or travel or hospitality, where things are quite visual, it's something where businesses actually, I don't think, have made a lot of ground, and actually they can do a lot more there to engage with the audiences in terms of promoting their products and holidays or whatever is of interest. Foursquare is interesting as well, and Yelp as well, which is this one. Now these are location-based services, and actually the idea is that you are able to go to a particular location and you can then use these social media to find out about those locations. You can find out about services and things in that area. They're not the only ones, there are other things that you can use as well. And actually this is very interesting from the point of view of leveling the playing field, because these technologies, along with other apps like the Mission and Golf, for example, really give smaller businesses a great opportunity. And I always use an example, when actually I was down here in Devon, it was a while ago, usually what we do if we were on holiday is we would kind of rely on recommendations for places to go to eat. Or you could kind of drive around, oh that looks nice, let's go in there. And that does mean that basically you're limited to what people tell you. You might see it in local advertising perhaps, and pick up on it, or what you drive by. However, we use these social media applications on our phones for the first time, and we found loads of places that are brilliant to go and eat that we would never have found before. And the great thing about them is not only do they say they were there, and it's like, oh, it's down this track, and it gives you direction to your current location, it's really brilliant. But the other thing is, it solves one of the other problems, which is, right, okay, this pub sounds good, not that far, menu looks nice, is it? Is it really nice? It's always a concern. But because there's social media, you've got all people's reviews on there, and you've got the ratings, and generally I would say that every single one we chose that had a high rating was good. It genuinely was good, and there was lots of detail on there from people as well. Oh, this is a great place for families to come, and it's really nice for the kids, it's got a great outdoor area, things that marketing wouldn't give you. So actually, these location-based services, although they're quite small in terms of views, I think they're really, really valuable, especially for smaller businesses, because they level that playing field and they allow those businesses to get on consumers' radars without having to spend vast amounts of money or be in a prime location where everyone's going to see them. So they're becoming much more important. I actually think Foursquare and Yelp as platforms aren't necessarily the best platforms, but the idea of location-based services I think is really, really important. I think it's something that's going to grow. And of course, actually what's happening is platforms like Facebook and Twitter are using those a lot more now to become a wider part of their office, and people can find and search for things in their local area. And that's very important because people like discovering things, and social media has a very important role to play in that. Vimeo is the kind of Twitter equivalent of videos. The idea is it's a bit like YouTube, and the videos are supposed to be very short and very, very snappy. And if you want to do a quick viral campaign or a clever sort of piece of video, Vimeo is a platform that can be used. What's interesting about it as well is whilst YouTube is obviously very big and is used by a lot of people, it's seen as being quite mainstream. Vimeo is seen as being really quite cool and hip still. I'm not quite sure how long that will last, but if you're kind of a young brand and you want to project a certain image, being on Vimeo and doing the video actually has a lot more kudos sometimes than being on YouTube. There's a very particular demographic, young professionals that use that. So there's loads of different platforms you can use, and the one that you use depends on what you want to do. If you're doing something visual, it's about Pinterest. If it's a location-based thing, it might be one of those location tools. If it is about short updates, maybe customer service and feedback, probably something like Facebook and Twitter. If it's the business community, maybe it's more LinkedIn. Choose to, and it's all opt-in. You basically, when you go to see that little seating chart and you choose your seat on the plane, you can see other people and where they're sitting. So if you're travelling on your own and you think, oh, they look quite interesting, you can actually go and sit next to them if the seats are free. And people can see the same about you. Now, I'm not quite sure what happens if you think someone's interesting and they don't think you're interesting. I've not worked that out. But it is quite fun because actually people do use it, and it's all up to us. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But it is a very intelligent use because actually you are taking information and you're putting it into a context and allowing people to use it in a way that's quite amusing. And then actually you can sit next to someone interesting and have a conversation. Maybe it's a business conversation, or maybe it's just someone you like the look of. And I don't know if anyone's got married or in a relationship on this, but actually it is something that's used quite a lot from KLM. The other thing that KLM did, which was very good, which was a much more niche campaign, is they, at Schiphol Airport, they decided that what they do on a couple of flights is they would look at everyone that shared their social profile, and they obviously knew when they were flying because they had their details, they knew which gate they were going from, it's their airline, and they looked at their profiles and they said, oh right, yeah, and this person here, this person loves photography, it's on their profile, it's one of their hobbies. They went and they got each person a gift, and so the person that liked photography might have got a small photography book, and they wrapped it up and they put their name on it, and everyone got a personalised gift. And when they went on the plane, or when they got into the check-in area to sit down at the gates rather, they actually had people going around the staff and giving these gifts out. And of course they know what they look like because they've got their profiles and they can see their Facebook. And they're going up to people and saying, oh, this is just for you. And people were sort of like, oh, it's something boring, or and people were opening them, and it's a photography book. It's like, wow, I liked that. Hang on a minute, what's this? This is really weird. And of course, because all these people are on social media, what do? Well, they take photos of it and they tweet it. And they say, wow, I've just got this from KLM, this is absolutely amazing. And everyone's like, that's really nice. And they tweet again, and it really created a massive buzz. And actually, it didn't cost them very much, not in the context of the marketing campaign, and they got thousands and thousands of more followers from that on their social media sites, and they generated quite a lot of goodwill as well. And that's what I mean about smart. that's a way of using social media in a way that could be a little bit creepy, but actually is really quite nice, and it gets lots of attention and it's quite interesting. And if you think about it, actually, although that was a very public thing, if you use it intelligently as a business, you can use it for marketing purposes because you can understand a lot about your customers if you've got their profiles, and that helps you deliver your services in a better way. So using social media smart, I think, is really important. Another nice example, it's not quite as exciting, but Malmaison, the hotel chain, they have a lot of followers on Facebook, they have a lot of followers on social media, they do a lot of cocktails, and they invent a lot of cocktails, and they decided that what they'd quite like to do is have a competition to name a cocktail. A bit dangerous in the context of Greenpeace. I'm not sure what the cocktail name was, but I don't think it was anything quite so radical. But the nice thing there was they got the community to engage, they got the community to vote on the short lists, and actually the person whose name got chosen, they got their name, I don't think they got their Facebook details put on there, but they got their name on all the menus. They said this was chosen by such and such. Or suggested by such and such. And it was a really very simple, but actually very nice way to engage for what usually would be a very mundane corporate process for naming something. They just threw it out there, and it gained them a lot of traction, and it gained them quite a lot of goodwill. So it doesn't have to be a big thing like KLM, it can just be about small everyday decisions. Another interesting one, this is Pinterest, and is Visit Philly. So City of Philadelphia, the official tourist association, obviously their job is to bring people into Philadelphia. And it's a big job because there's lots of places people can go in the world, there's lots of places people can go in the US. They do a pretty good job, they're a pretty good tourist agency. But one of the things that they did, which was very interesting with the Pinterest page, is actually they left it open. So they said, actually what we want is for people who live here, people who come here, to curate the content. We want to see what you've seen, we want your suggestions, we want your ideas. And it's really interesting because what a lot of people did is, people take great photos themselves, they do a bit of curation, they pull the best ones out and they bring them to the top. But what they found was people were taking, this is a sort of alleyway through which you can go to Benjamin Franklin's house, and it's apparently where he passed when he was alive all the time. It's one of his routes to when he'd go off to do business. And people take pictures of it, and people, from Visit Philly put a bit of information, but then loads of people underneath engage. Oh, thanks, I've been there, it was really good. Or, oh, did you know actually if you turn right at the end of here you see something else. And actually what they've started to create is a very social site where it's got lots of tips and ideas and suggestions, and actually people will go on there to find things to do. And it's all really driven not by Visit Philly themselves, they curate it, but it's driven by the people who are there. So it feels very genuine, very organic. And it's something that actually is getting them quite a lot of engagement and runs alongside all their other social media campaigns. So it's a great example of using something very visual but throwing it out to the community to create. So there's some interesting examples of how to use social media. Just briefly, just to conclude, I think there are probably 10 things that I would take away about social media. The first one is, what does it mean to you? There are lots of ways in which you can use social media. The most important thing we need to do in an organisation is say, well, what is it for us? Is it a marketing tool? Is it communication? Is it customer service? Is it promotion? What is it for? And that's the first question anyone should ask, because if you just go onto it with a blank canvas, you don't really know what you're doing. If you know what it means to you, set clear objectives. Do you want a set number of followers? Do you want it to drive so much interaction? Do you want so many customer service interactions a day? Do you want to put out so many pieces of marketing literature? It's really important because it's a very organic, it's a very sort of fast-paced environment. And if you don't set objectives, it's very difficult to measure whether there's been a success, because a lot of it's out there. So you've got to have very clear objectives that you can measure and say, actually, yes, we have got to that number of followers. What's the next objective? It's like any business sort of measure. It needs a sort of KPI around it that you can really assess whether it's working for you. Make sure you use the appropriate platforms. We've just talked about that. That's critical. If you're trying to promote something visual, don't do it on Twitter because it's not the right medium. It will just annoy people. If you're trying to do something very professional, Facebook is not very strict because it's extremely tongue-in-cheek and it's very social. You're much better to use something like LinkedIn. So really think about which is the right platform for your objectives and for your what it means for you. Understand the context as well. This is very important. If you are doing something, for example, on Twitter, it needs to be short, it needs to be sharp, it needs to be very real time. If you're doing something on a blog, for example, that's much more social, well, you do it in a very different way. And it's understanding the context of those different platforms that's very important. Incorporate and integrate. This is quite interesting because a lot of the companies go, oh well, we've got a Twitter, we've done our Facebook, and we've done a bit of Pinterest as well. Actually, the most powerful thing is when they're combined. So you bring them together. So sometimes you tweet about things on your Pinterest, but wider than that as well. It's on your website, you've got a Twitter feed. If you're a restaurant, it's on your menu. If you're someone in tourist or travel, it's on your leaflets and your marketing. Actually, you need to integrate it and see it as part of the wider marketing. And where people do that, of course, you get cross-channel engagement, and that's really powerful. Don't just leave it to stand alone as a separate Twitter feed. Really integrate it. That's when it works well. Use it to create reach. What you want to do ideally is to create things that are interesting that people then retweet or they repost or they like, and it spreads the message. That's very important, and you need to think about things therefore that are interesting. I mean, they've got better at it, but the number of retailers that used to be on Twitter, and they used to tweet things in the morning like, morning, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? And it's so annoying. It's like, yeah, I know, I can look out the window. It's not interesting. It's not adding value to my life. However, if you say, it's a beautiful day, and it's a nice day for a barbecue, and we've got £5 off steak today, that's quite useful for me to know that. Even better if you tweet a recipe, even better if you perhaps have a picture. It's about creating that interesting content that creates engagement and then creates reach. Listen and learn, that's really important, because obviously these are social platforms, they're about engagement, they're about conversation, but actually sometimes just sitting back and listening and understanding what's going on is vital, because you learn an awful lot about your customers, about trends, about opinions, about your own brand, by listening to what the feedback is from those channels. So it's not just about broadcasting, it is about listening as well. I think social CRM is very important, actually because it's becoming much bigger in terms of customer engagement. Actually linking in social media to your CRM platform is really important. If you've got a social media engagement strategy that allows you to track your customers in a CRM system and understand their Facebook details so that you can understand more about them, that becomes a lot more powerful because you can make really great marketing decisions from that than if you just have a standalone Facebook site. I think this is something a lot of businesses are starting to look at now. Now they're more involved. It sometimes involves expense to do, but an integrated way is much, much more powerful in terms of actually engaging and using the information social media has to create much better decisions within the business. And that's, I think, a challenge for the next couple of years. Allocate resource. This is really important because if you're going to do social media, you need to do it seriously. And it's actually very important because even simple things can mean the difference between success and failure. And one example, that's their credit, they've now remedied. When First Great Western first went on social media, great, they were on Twitter. So if you had a problem on a train, you could tweet them. If you wanted to know the time of the train, you could tweet them. If you had any issues, you could tweet them. And generally, they're quite good. They would get back to you. However, you know, at 5:30, Mr. Twitter guy or Mrs. Twitter girl would go home. So hang on a minute. The last train out of Paignton is 23:45. So if I'm travelling on that train, there's no one for me to speak to on the Twitter feed. That's a bit odd because Twitter's a 24/7 thing. That's a really good example of something that's very useful, but you're applying an old business model logic, as in businesses close down at 5:30 and everyone knocks off, to something that doesn't work in the social media world. Social media doesn't work like that. It doesn't really have time limits. It's on all the time. That's something that they have actually remedied. So actually, it goes on to much later now. And during the floods, I think people were there 24/7, which actually was a very good response, and it allowed them to deal with much more queries. But if you're going to go on social media, you need to allocate resource and you need to do it properly, because if you don't, actually it just ends up really annoying people. And the final thing is, really back to the thing that we said at the start, it's understanding that social media is very much about a community approach. The old model of you as a business standing there and saying, we are Marks and Spencer, or we are whoever, and this is what we stand for, and we are communicating to you, that's gone now. I think that the whole business world is a lot more democratic. It's a lot more open than it used to be, and social media has facilitated that. But when you're within the realm of social media, you have to understand that as a brand or as a company, yes, you might be a billion-dollar brand, you might be global, but actually in terms of social media, you're no more significant than the person from down the road who happens to have their own Twitter feed. because actually it has been that great leveller. And businesses that have gone in with kind of big muscle and sort of tried to preach or be too corporate really have come unstuck on social media, and we've seen some of them today. They're not the only ones. Big companies, like Nestle, have come massively unstuck on social media because they've treated it as a kind of platform where they preach and they don't engage properly. Those companies that have really treated it as a community, they've treated the people on there as equals, they've engaged, they've had a laugh, they've really just relaxed in a sense, really have had the best sort of outcomes from social media and have got the most followers. And KLM's a great example of that, a way that it's just tongue-in-cheek, it's a bit irreverent, it's quite funny. And that's the most important thing I think about social media. It's understanding that it has changed that kind of power relationship. It's been that revolution that actually it's not that kind of one-to-many communication, it's that many-many communication, and you're part of a conversation, you're not necessarily just the author of it. And that's it, and there's my Twitter if you want to follow me. Thanks very much. I think we do have a few questions if anyone has any.
Neil, that's great, thank you. I've heard you do that 3 times now, but with different nuances, and I still don't believe how you managed to do it without your notes.
That's not how, 3 times.
Oh, that's right. How can you spot a bogus person on Twitter, for example? How do we know that @Neil Retail isn't some multinational conglomerate?
Oh, that new bit definitely isn't. Actually, the nicest example of that is this is not the way you solve it, but what someone once, it was Sunday morning, and of course there was lots of politics going on Sunday morning, and someone tweeted John Prescott, and they said, "Oh, come on, it's not really you, John. You've also got someone in the office doing this. You wouldn't be up at this time in the morning." And the guy was called Ben, and within seconds, John Prescott was sitting in a chair. And he had a sign, it's like, handwritten, it said, "Hello, Ben." And it was a great example, because it's like, well, actually, it is him. And it was quite clever. And actually, John Prescott's quite interesting, because he's great on social media. You think that most dinosaurs he wouldn't do it. He's actually great. He gets his community approach. But in terms of them not doing that, I think the way you can spot it is looking at the past pattern of tweets and things like that. I mean, if you find someone who's quite consistent in tweeting and has a variety of things they talk about, generally it's quite real, because the person's engaging, you can see the patterns of engagement perhaps with other people, tweeting back, replying to them, you can see that is a genuine human being. Where it's a kind of a bot or it's an automated thing, there's not so much engagement, and the tweeting pattern seems to be very regular, it might be quite sporadic, the topics might not be as diverse. So just by reading the feed, I think you can see how real or genuine that person is. The other thing you can do more now, so for example, if you go onto my Twitter, I mean not everyone does this, but at the top, in a little bit where you put information, it links to my LinkedIn. And actually when you have that's an example of linking obviously social media. Actually you say, well actually this person probably is real because I can see the LinkedIn page and from there I can see something else, and I can see this person's profile or footprint in the online space. So I think it's very much about looking at all of the kind of tweets and engagement. But Twitter themselves obviously have a problem with fake accounts, and they're just being used to follow, because you can buy followers basically. And when you look at those, you can see that they're just automated things. But Twitter's actually taking a lot of those out because they don't want that kind of fluff. So there's a bit of self-policing in that from Twitter. But I think most of the time you just have to look and read and see if the person's real. And a surefire way to find out if it's genuine is actually to tweet them and ask them something. Because if they're real, they'll probably, like John Prescott, will respond. If they're not, they're likely to
Well, can I ask, earlier in the presentation, some of your stats said that far more women seem to use social media. 2 things really. How do you know that, and why do you think that is? And also, from a marketing perspective, do you think businesses should be really bearing that in mind, that more women are engaging with it?
I think, how we know it is all of the, most of the stats, we do lots of surveys each year, so we go out and we talk to a representative sample. I think in this instance it's about 5,000 people, and we ask them a whole range of questions. Do they use it, what they use it for, and the results fall out of that. And because it's a nationally representative sample, we say that that is a representative view of the population and who is using it, and it happens that more women come out and have used that as a sort of a platform in a way. As to why, I mean, I'm not sure because we didn't really ask people why, but there seems to be, in some of the data that we've had a look at, it seems to be a lot more younger women who are using it and boosting those numbers. And I think, it sounds a bit stereotypical, but I think it goes back to that point before about some of the things that are on social media. I mean, if you look at fashion, for example, I mean, men are interested in fashion and young men are interested in fashion. There's a lot more young women interested in fashion, and it's quite a good platform for that because you can share pictures with your friends. There's a lot of trends that you can spot. You can look at, the latest looks and those sorts of things. So I think there's quite a lot of content to engage with, and I mean, men as well, there is. But I think that's maybe one of the reasons with the younger demographic why you've got a greater take-up with that female segment. But actually, it's not that much of a gap. It's it's a small gap between the two sexes. In terms of using it for marketing, I mean, I think it just comes down to the point that you need to really know your audience and who you're targeting. I mean, a great example is, for example, if you're targeting busy mums, you want to get into their lives, using something like Mumsnet is perfect because that's where they coalesce, that's where they go around. They will use that site very proactively. They will spend time on that site. So I think it's about looking at where your audience is and really going after that audience in the appropriate place. Now, on a broad platform like Twitter, it's quite difficult. But of course, if you look at Facebook, yes, it's a broad platform, but you'll have lots of groups that people have created, and if you get into those groups, you can use those groups to target particular segments of interest. That's very valuable, and that's one of the points really. It's about saying, well, we're on Facebook, but we need to look very specifically at what we want to do and who we want to target within that. And if you find the right group and you engage in the right way, like Mumsnet, which is on Facebook, there's also a forum, then you can use that to really great effect. But again, it comes down to the fact of making sure that you understand it's that community approach, because so many organisations have come unstuck on Mumsnet because it's a very vociferous body. There's a lot of opinions on there. There's a lot of knowledge on there as well, because these are people who are bringing up kids, not a brand that's just talking about bringing up kids. You need to do it in the right way, but if you do it in the right way, it gets loads of engagement. So I think it's just about finding the segment and then going after them in an appropriate way.
Two questions for you, Neil. Firstly, can you decode the acronym CRM for me?
Yeah, so just in customer relationship management. So it's just basically it's just a fancy name for a system that manages your customer data, really.
Okay, all right. Second one, Google Plus. It doesn't seem to appear amongst the most popular platforms.
No.
Which I find very strange, because Google is such a giant.
Yes, that is very interesting. In fact, my colleague Stephen and I were talking about that yesterday. The reason I think it is because basically it's a Johnny-come-lately, and I think it's a kind of Facebook wannabe. And Google is very good, and Google is brilliant in search. Google is brilliant in so many different areas. However, I think it's one of those areas, the social sphere, in that sense, that they just haven't got, because there's two issues. The first thing, I don't see Google Plus does anything for me that doesn't exist out there already. I don't see it bringing anything new to the party. I don't see it as being particularly exciting, and I think, that's my personal opinion, but I think the same is true of a lot of consumers of social media. The other problem is a crowding out effect, which is an issue with social media, where things are a bit samey, because actually, if you're on Facebook, and you're on Twitter, and you're on something else, because Google Plus came after, it's a bit like, I'm not joining another one. It's just something else, and I think because it wasn't differentiated, it's quite a crowded space. I don't think they've got people flocking to them. And there's the third issue. It's a community, and if your friends aren't on it, and if there's not a wider group on it, it's much less attractive. So I think Google has massive potential, because the one thing it has that Facebook and Twitter don't have is it basically knows a lot about you. It knows what you search for. If you've got a Gmail account, it knows a lot about your emails. If they can link all of those things together and create a really sensitive social platform that's actually really interesting and engaging, that could be a real game changer. But at the moment with Google Plus, they're not really there yet. But I think it's definitely one to watch, because I think knowing Google, they will get there at some point, because they've got loads of other bits. But at the moment, I just don't think it's that great. It did feature, but it was just further down that list of things.
Okay, thank you. How do you know platform Twitter, or there's another one, to integrate a Facebook and Twitter?
Well, I think those platforms are very useful. I mean, I think if you are a professional tweeter, as in a business, I think you do need to use some sort of platform, because obviously the other way is just typing them in like you would do on your phone, etc. But actually, what those platforms allow you to do is to schedule tweets. They allow you to monitor tweets, monitor feedback, and that's much more useful because obviously, a prime example is you might want to tweet something on Christmas Day. And a lot of retailers did tweet things on Christmas Day, stupid things like Devons, I hope you're enjoying your turkey. It's like, thanks Devons, that's great. I'm not sure, I mean, it was nice to get a Christmas message from you in the morning. That was quite nice. But there were a lot of silly tweets coming up, but some of them were quite good. I mean, some of them, I think, I can't remember who it wasn't John in Lakeland. Someone tweeted, cleaning up, the roasted tin from the turkey, why not just straight away and buy a new one at Lakeland, open tomorrow Boxing Day. It's quite funny. But a lot of those obviously sent on Christmas Day. I mean, I hope there's no one sitting there in Lakeland's head office on Christmas Day. But they're obviously all scheduled and they're all programmed before. So it's very, very useful from that point of view to have those programs, to really be able to set up that program of tweets and really think about your marketing engagement, set it all up, get it all organised so that everything runs smoothly. The one thing though you have to be very careful of is if something intervenes. So if you were tweeting a funny message, for example, and it was really quite irreverent and tongue-in-cheek, and then there's a big natural disaster or something very serious happens, you've got to be able to have a way of remotely, if someone's not in the office, putting a stop to that. Because there were some things with the Oscars, there were loads of promoted tweets went out, and there were just lots of things that looked really weird because the Oscars hadn't quite played out as some of these people thought they would play out, and there were lots of negative tweets about some of the celebrities, and then a Brown was popping up promoting the celebrity and trying to jump on the bandwagon, and it just looked really odd because obviously they've been scheduled in advance. So I think you have to be quite careful, but those platforms are really useful just from an organisational and monitoring point of view.
Have you witnessed any exodus of youngsters from Facebook for two reasons? One, the parents are on there, and two, Facebook are looking to monetize the platform?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a bit of a kickback against Facebook. It's not massive, but there definitely has been a bit of a loss of coolness among those younger consumers. And that's one of the concerns with Facebook, because I don't think it will do, but there's always this question mark with a lot of social media sites. Will they go MySpace way, which is basically they're really popular and then they just fade into obscurity. I think Facebook's probably too big for that to happen, but the concern is that as a new generation comes up, it loses traction with that generation above them that use them a little bit less, and therefore it becomes a lot less attractive. I think for young people, they don't want to see parents and older people on there because they don't. That's just a fact of life. It is their hangout, they want it to be cool. But I think the way in which Facebook is developed, and you have groups, and actually there's a lot of privacy settings, and you can decide who sees what, I think that almost makes it sort of siloed and segmented, and it gets around that problem to a degree. So actually you can just see your part of it, and I think that's quite useful, and it's a sensible thing that they've done. I think the wider concern though is in some of the things where people are a bit more corporate. So for example with Instagram, when they got Instagram, and they suddenly overnight changed all the privacy rules, and they just said, oh, your terms and conditions are changing, and basically every picture you take, we've got copyright over, we can use exactly what we want, and you don't have a choice in it. It was a massive kick to the users of Instagram, and they lost loads of users overnight. People just said, right, fine, we're not using it, we'll go and use something else, there's loads of other tools we can use. And that was really stupid because they were thinking in a very corporate way. So I think there's kind of corporatising it too much in a way is dangerous, and it definitely loses users. But the loss we've seen today has been there, and it's significant, but it's not enough to send jitters throughout Facebook. But the concern is, 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, are they still going to be as relevant? And that's something I think there's more question mark over. And that's where they've got to keep reinventing themselves.
I just got one. I'm interested to know how the Dave Carroll video went viral. Would it have been because people were searching for the airline and sort of stumbled across it initially and then began to share it?
Yeah, it's interesting, and that question of how something becomes viral. I mean, the rules, I think, of it are, first of all, it has to be something that's engaging and interesting. And the fact is, Dave Carroll's video was he's quite good at singing, it was quite funny, it's about a real life situation most of us have dealt with, and we all felt a lot of sympathy for him. So the engagement is there, and if that hadn't been there, I don't think it would have gone viral. And then there are really two routes, I think, if you look at things that have gone viral that are taken. One of them is a very democratic route, and actually it starts off, with one person saying, I like it, or tweeting it. And it's that multiplication effect. Someone goes, oh, I like that too. And then 2 people have retweeted it, and then that 4, and then 8. And that does happen, and it really multiplies up. And of course, if you keep multiplying up, like that, it comes to a very big number very, very quickly. That's one of the things that can happen. In David Carroll's case, though, I think that happened initially. However, what then happened is another, what you call sort of seeding effect, where actually a big hitter picks up on it. Now that could be an individual that's a celebrity with loads of followers, it might be a newspaper, it might be a magazine that has a lot of followers, and they retweet it or promote it, and then of course it just goes up to thousands of people, and then you get more of a multiplication effect. And that happened in the latter stages of Dave Carroll's thing. So when the New York Times picked up on it, that then put it into the big league, so it went from being something like 800,000 or 900,000, which was a lot, and enough to get their attention, to being in the millions and millions. And then it was in the print press, and then of course it got even more. So it can go in one of two ways. Of course that's really important for organisations as well. And it's difficult because you've got to do it in a very sensible way. But if you, in the UK, if you wanted as a brand to promote yourself and to get great publicity, the person that you would want to do that to will probably be Stephen Fry, because actually he has an incredible number of followers. They're all actually really good followers, and they all generally believe what he says. They're very bought into his, world. But influencing him is incredibly difficult because he's not going to market any old thing. So it's a really challenging thing to do. But to make something go viral, it's got to be really interesting, engaging for either those seeders or for the organic thing. And in Dave Carroll's case, it was something that was really good.
I appreciate you've been time limited today, but one thing I find really interesting for you to just cover briefly, having the awareness of clout, for example, is how you go about measuring and monitoring your success.
Yeah, I think that is important, and I think clout is an interesting example. I mean, clout, it's strapped on as the standard for influence, and it supposedly measures influence. The big problem I have with clout is no one quite knows what clout is. I mean, if I look at my clout score, I think it's 61.5 or something. I actually haven't a clue of what that means. I can kind of see a hierarchy where I might sit. But then it's bizarre, because then if I look at Waitrose is something like 63.8. Waitrose should be a lot higher than I am. I mean, Waitrose is a big brand, but knows what followers. And where something's opaque, and it's indexed, and it's aggregated, and it doesn't make sense, I think actually it's pretty meaningless. And people are like, well, what does this mean? So I think it's a real challenge to get something that's meaningful. What most people do is they look at number of followers or number of tweets, but that doesn't indicate quality of followers or quality of tweets. So I think, the way in which you do it has to be a bit more sensitive. And one of the great examples of how it was done, there is a very simple way, by Domino's, for example. What they've done is really looking from the reverse direction how successful they are. They will run a campaign on Facebook, for example, and they will look at the number of people who look at it, they'll look at the number of people who like it, and they divide that through by the number of followers they've got, and that gives them an engagement score. And for that, it's not the score that's important, it's the relativity of the score versus other campaigns. So they know on average that if they run a campaign on Facebook, it should get an engagement of, say, 41. So they then know that if it's 20, it's dreadful. If it's 50, it's a great campaign, because they've got that benchmark for their own use. And that's really important. I think it's having that benchmark understanding and then looking at the relativity to that benchmark. Because if you just look at it in isolation and you say it's 41 or whatever, it's very difficult to know whether it's successful. But that's something I think that relies on it being very, very clear, which the Domino's one is. It's very clear how it's been calculated, so that it's just very understandable and it's very simple to track and to trace. But clout is interesting, but for me, I don't find it useful because I actually just don't understand under the bonnet how it works, and they deliberately keep it opaque, which, I think renders it a little bit unhelpful anyway.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Brilliant.